Hello, thank you for giving me the opportunity for being here. As Anders has very well noted, we are going to talk about traditional architectural education in Spain between 1752 and 1955. This timeline has a specific reasons. 1752 was the creation of the Royal Academy in Spain, and what we had before was a very guildhall education. People will go to certain artisans, certain master builders, and they will learn from them. And this is one of the ones that we keep memory from, Diego López de Arenas, who is the only one who left a treatise on Mudéjar architecture, and thanks to him, we know how to build this architecture. We will talk about that at the end. So, say that 1752 was the creation of the Royal Academy, Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando, and what you can see here is an allegory of the foundation of the academy. Allegories are very important. We need to be aware of how in Western Europe we have always communicated thoughts, feelings, and ideas through images. And that's very important because what we can see here is Mercury bringing with great speed the three arts to Minerva, who is going to present it to the king. So it's the bringing of the arts to Spain following the French model. So this is the building where the Royal Academy was, and this is the building where the classes were initially held. So architects, painters, and sculptors will come to this building and work together. So as you can imagine, over the time, this building became too small, and eventually, in 1844, they changed the building. They went to another much bigger building that they had taken over from the Jesuits and after the confiscation of the monasteries. And it was published on official documents. So we can trace all the sequence of planning, everything that the students were learning, it's published. And it's public dominion because it was published in the several law bulletins of the government. In 1857, after a little bit of a debate, they realized that the Royal Academy cannot hold any more students of architecture because they were also mixing with the students of engineering. And after that debate, they decided that they're going to create a technical superior school of architecture in 1857. And that was completely separate from the engineers school. And this is very important to note because up until then, engineers and architects were going together to learn at the academy. Then they were transferred to this building in central Madrid, quite close to it. This was a building from 17th century, and they added a new door, a new gate, which has the symbol that you cannot see very well there, unfortunately, but it has the compass and the rose, which is one of the symbols of our Classic Planning Academy, which are two symbols of the Spanish architects, and I wanted to bring in that to the Classic Planning Academy. The compass represents the precision, and the rose represents the beauty. Why? Because architects design beauty with great precision, or at least we try. So that was the school up until 1936, when it was transferred to this building, which is the ones if you have been in Spain, after the architecture in Spain. This is the building that you see. It's still quite a decent, nice building. But unfortunately, everything was transferred in May 1936. And if you know a bit of Spanish history, in July 1936, we had the Civil War. And this was in the borderline between the two bands of the Civil War and suffered a lot. And whilst the library of the school was able of staying in the old building, all the drawings of the students were already transferred to the new school and they disappeared. The winter was very harsh and the soldiers used the drawings to heat themselves. They knew that they couldn't touch the buildings, but they were not so delicate about the drawings. So most of the drawings have disappeared. We keep very, very little from those who decided to retire them from the deposit, which are very little, and I'm going to show you some of them. In 1875, due to the massive demand, a new school opened in Barcelona, which is one of the other key points that I'm putting here. It was initially in this beautiful building, and this is what you have it now, unfortunately. And the limit that I have put is 1955. And why 1955? In 1955, this building that you can see there, the Labor University in Gijón, was finished, and all the architects, which were not very much back then, they gathered together, they went to do a site visit, and they had a critical session. The architect, which was named Luis Moya, was smashed during that session, literally. Everyone criticized him, and he had to defend himself as best as he could, and it's a bit of the symbolic finishing of traditional education there, because after that, things wouldn't be the same. And yeah, it's true that still Franco was in power, but in the early 1950s, Spain had started to be open again to the Americans. American students were coming, and the Spanish were going to America. As of course, Spain was a dictatorship, and architecture couldn't do a revolution as they did in Chile or in Cuba, where they went to the libraries and banned all the Vignolas, and then Walter Gropius used to put some order and implement modernism. Here it had to be done in a more subtle way, so they ended up changing the plans slowly but steadily. And in 1956, actually, when the architectural market started to be open, and the third school of architecture in Seville is opened. And this is the facade. This is a new facade for the school, built in 1956. So it's telling you still how the quality of the crafts were done back then. But this is what it is now. This is where I studied, actually. So this puts you a little bit of the context to justify which the starting and the ending point. We're going to talk a little bit how was studying at the architecture of the Royal Academy. One of the first things that the Academy did a lot was publish more allegories, because the power of the image was very important. Publishing all these engravings, distributing all over the country, was a way of showing the power of the new Academy and what you could learn from architecture. And here we see architecture at the top, covering the benefits of our children, and the children down there playing and drafting the orders. It's very important that they were showing little putty, because something that is in the Academy never showed anyone how to draw the orders. They had to learn them by themselves. And how did they learn? With master builders and with master craftsmen. This is another one, a little bit more mystical, where architecture is shown as the light that is bringing, as a goddess that is bringing light to the people by the study of geometry and many other disciplines. So the Academy had the power and the vision of showing themselves as the new bearers of a new architecture in Spain in the 18th century. From that stage in the Academy, because as you remember in 1844 and 1857 the studies gets divided, anything prior to 1857 was stored in the Academy, and you have approximately 3,000 drawings to enjoy and to see what people were doing back then. And I'm going to show you 3 examples so that you can see what the students were drawing. This is one exam from 1856, where the architect Virgilio Verda, who won the first prize, by the way, drew a plan for a building. I mean, Dr. Buras has shown before the Palace of Charles V. This is directly inspired in the Palace of Charles V, even the courtyard is not round. The only detail I want you to focus is the pinky color that they used to fill the walls, which we still use nowadays in many drawings. So you can see where the tradition was coming. This is another one made for a beautification of the facade of the Academy, which was thought to be very simple. It was not enough, so they decided to add like another portico. It was a trompe-l'oeil to celebrate actually the visit of the kings to the Academy, which you can see the portraits there. So again, very allegorical. This other one is from 1839, almost by the end of the architectural education. And it was, again, another exam. And you can see that they were starting to add a lot of construction details. These drawings don't look as elaborated as others you could see on the French with the analytique, but they were having a lot of thought were put on the construction of all these beautiful buildings that they were designing. But there was not only a Royal Academy in Madrid. All these academies were funded up until the split of the academies. I want to focus you on 1781 in Mexico City. They funded an academy, which is still part of the Spanish Empire. The building is still there, by Manuel de Tolsa, a Spanish architect who throughout all his life in Mexico. And sometimes, I mean, especially from an Anglocentric perspective, we think that nothing happened in South America, but the first person in comment Vitruvius, there was a guy called the Mexican Vitruvius in 18th century, who wrote more about Vitruvius than anyone else, Pedro Marquez. We have Manuel de Tolsa, which was an architect who did a lot of beautiful architecture in Mexico City, and you cannot understand McKim, Met and White without understanding Manuel de Tolsa. So it's a bold statement, but this is the point of the importance of the Spanish architecture in America. And I bring here a book by Vignola, Principios de Arquitectura según el sistema de Vignola, because whatever they were using, the fonts that they were using for architecture was Vignola. And again, we come from an Anglocentric perspective, what they got is Palladio, but in a more European, continental European perspective, the core point was Vignola together with Vitruvius and Serlio. So it also changes a bit the perspective, but puts you in context which were the books that they were using. So Vignola was very important. It was an edition for 1813 and was for all the studies for the academy in Cadiz. But similar books were published and similar manuscripts were running even for the engineers. So we are moving towards how was studying architecture in the School of Architecture of Madrid. And between 1844 and 1956, we have 12 plans of studies. So it sounds quite a lot. But for you to know, in the same time in Spain, we have 2 dynastic changes, 3 civil wars, 2 republics, 2 dictatorships, and 5 constitutions. So as you know, we like changing things in Spain. And what can we learn from those plans? What we learn is that, first of all, is that we can now trace back to any of the plans that I have mentioned. You can go back to the official documents, you type for it, and then you get all the contents, everything, when was the exam, how much they need to get to approve, everything, absolutely everything you needed to know to pass the title, to obtain the title of architect in any of those plans is explained. Important, yeah, we have a lot of plans, but these changes are accommodating changes in the government. We changed a lot of government, so at least they have to say by the king, by the people, by the dictator, etc. Evolutions in techniques. For example, we have seen before there was a plan in 1896. It was the first one in including electricity. It was some pioneering thing. And then to set up a legal framework to distinguish between architects, engineers, and master builders, which was something that was not clear while everyone was studying in the Royal Academy. So a lot of the effort in all these plans was to set up who could do what. So to the point in which it ended up being agreed that the architects would do everything, the master builder will build anything that the architects tell them to build, and the engineers would do anything else, so mostly big infrastructures. But still then, all the engineers would have to learn the orders. Now, this is also important because the Spanish architects also are legally liable on technical matters, and the engineers specialize on machinery and infrastructure. This is still valid nowadays. So we don't need consultants in Spain to do a building. As opposed to many other plans who were inspired in the École des Beaux-Arts, the plans of studies in Spain were inspired in the École Polytechnique. So that means the great importance given to technique as opposed to only art. The access exams or preparatory courses were required. Again, each plan was changing. If you needed to do an exam or you needed to do a preparatory course to do, but the students have to learn the drawing techniques and the orders on their own. They would be examined about the orders, and you're going to see some of the material they used to learn about that. Design workshops only appeared in 1875. Before that, everything was together, and they were doing everything at the same time, history, design, everything, and from 1875 onwards, they start with the design. The models of reference were, on one side, the neoclassical tradition, and then regional architecture. And I put there, French Beaux-Arts was considered modernist. You see a lot of teachers complaining that in 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, all my students are modernists because I'm copying everything coming from Paris. They hated the Beaux-Arts. They wanted the students to learn the proper Spanish tradition. And that was a debate that lasted up until the late 30s in Spain. And then, as opposed to what happened, for example, in the United States, where you have the emergence, and France, of course, the emergence of the atelier system. In Spain, we were having the 19th century is terrible for Spanish economy and society. We couldn't develop an atelier system that could compete, could create prices because the School of Architecture didn't have money to even buy books. I mean, we had to rely for 40 years on a Spanish guy who emigrated to America, Juan Carlos Cebrián, who was donating books to the library because the school didn't have budget to buy books. And then, yeah, there would be a lot of trips around the country, and there would be a lot of documentation of the buildings around the country. And nowadays, you can still, they did a massive series of engravings for reflecting all those trips, and you can buy them. Nowadays, those engravings still, they did so many engravings that still in 21st century, you can buy them for a couple of €100. So you can imagine how many they did that they haven't still been able to sell them. So this is one of the typical books that the students would use to learn, to present themselves for the exam. This comes from Argentina, where they were showing the same thing, but this type of books But then you can see, obviously, it's not a book designed for young adults or for teenagers. It's more a book for kids. You can very clearly see that the kids, the one shown drawing. And there would be books in which you could have the order on one side, and then you could replicate it on the other. They were almost like the booklets that you used to learn how to write. There would be very extensive manuals about what was taught. So not only we have the resume that the law does, we had, like, especially at the very beginning, the directors of the school would write whole books about all the materials that would be taught there. And later on, we would have the Central Society of Architects who would publish regular reviews of what's happening in the School of Architecture. And later on, this book is very important by Teodoro de Anasagasti. He wrote a massive book comparing the plans of study in Geneva, Munich, Vienna, and Madrid. And it is very interesting because while on one side Anasagasti was surprised about how much money all these cities had to teach the students, he was quite surprised that the Spanish students with much little money were learning more than them. And it's quite interesting because you can, with this book, you can check not only one, you can check 4 programs of the same time. This was done in 1920. And it is interesting because what history tells us is that everyone was modernist in this time, and this book is telling you the opposite. There is no modernist at all thought in these books. And these are some of the very little drawings that were capable of being saved. Most of them because they were held by students who didn't want to give them to the school. So probably they didn't pass the exam, and then out of anger they took them home. So this is from 1902, as a typical design of a facade for a house. You can see a little bit of construction. You can see some elements. All those obviously drawn by hand. This was after the war. These were just some quick notes by a student taken in October 1946. You can see it's 1946. No, we are being told that back then everyone was modernist, and look what they were doing. This one from 1956. So these were part of what the students were using to relearn the orders are from the study of history of architecture. So that's what I mean. You can very clearly see also the date there, 1956, 1957, and another one for ornament. So this was not to learn the technique. So this was to demonstrate that you learn it. So they had to learn it at high school, or they had to learn it at private academies to go for that. And this ends the period that we were talking about. I'm going to make a small epilogue to see what had happened afterwards. Still, I mean, one of the architects that we were talking about a moment ago, Luis Moya Blanco, is one of the great latest classicists of Spanish architecture. He built his masterwork is the Laboral University of Gijón, which is a wonderful building, one of the biggest buildings in Spain. It's a university to teach art and craft. Nowadays, it's a mix of high school and technical institute. And this is what people were doing in Spain in the 1950s. He had a very big sensibility about oval shapes, about different techniques, Guarino Guarini, and the others, which many of you who are students of Professor Mitrovic, you know very well, but also not to antiquity, like this gate that you see to the right, which is inspired in the gate of the Market of Miletus. So all of a sudden you have a compendium of Western architecture, all of a sudden in northern Spain. Another of the biggest architects that we had back then, although this one has some lights and more shadows than light, was Fernando Chueca Goitia. He died in 2004. I remember having heard him when he was very, very old, giving lectures at the School of Seville. He finished the Cathedral of Madrid. So when you go now to Madrid and you see this beautiful cathedral, you think that it may have been there forever. It was finished in the 90s. So it's still telling that some stuff was capable of continuing in Spain. Only very punctual cases. It was not the whole, but punctual cases it could continue. And of course, we still have the living legend called Rafael Manzano Martos, who was awarded with the Driehaus Prize in 2010, was one of my professors in Sevilla, knowledgeable of anything you might ask him about. He restored Alcázar of Seville, he restored Medina Sahara, he restored everything you could imagine, but also had time to build new buildings like this custom office in Cadiz in the 1950s. And this building has an interesting history because up until very recently, they wanted to demolish it because it was lack of interest. And it's quite a beautiful building. When you see them around, it's integrating perfectly within the walls and other 18th century buildings. So it's telling us about a will of continuum. And there has been in Spain, thanks to the immense heritage that we have, there has been a very subtle school on just at least studying heritage and intervening on the heritage that had kept the crafts alive. Crafts, like you remember, we were talking at the beginning about Diego López de Arenas, about the book that he wrote. We have this architect, Enrique Nuere, born in 1938, who was restoring all these type of roofs. He got the book of López de Arenas, who is unreadable. No, you open the book, you cannot understand what he's talking about. And he converted it into a system. So we still have that. I wanted to bring this drawing, not for any other reason. This was from 1990, very modernist architect, but you can still see the quality of the drawing. Because something that the Spanish schools of architecture have always insisted is in the high quality of the drawings. These ones are a series of drawings done by students in 1992 about the Alcázar of Seville, so you can still see how all this technique and how all this focus on drawings for students who are studying heritage is still encouraged. Nowadays it has been displaced a bit for digital techniques, but still there is a lot of input, a lot of effort put in the graphics. And we come to our days in which, thanks to the effort of Alejandro García Armida and others, and INBAU Spain and the Fundación de Culturas Constructivas, we have a lot of traditional summer schools in Spain, both in Spain and Portugal, that are contributing to keep the crafts alive. And I couldn't end without also making a mention to what we do at the Classic Planning Academy, where we're also trying to keep the crafts alive. You can see some of the works of our students there. And we combine a lot of things. We combine the holistic method, but there is also a glimpse of the Spanish education, because I am the director, I am the one who teaches the materials. There is a glimpse of all the Spanish education seen on there. This is an image from one of the typical classes, and we have planned an open exhibition online quite soon. We will announce it, so stay tuned and seek information from us at the Classic Planning Institute. So thank you very much.